Ireland face Italy in Dublin on the 24th of October, so that's a fortnight from tomorrow in the first of their rescheduled 2020 Six Nations games before a trip to take on France a week later on Halloween. Fiona Steed is with us now to parse through the squad that Andy Farrell has picked for this. Fiona, good afternoon to you. How are you doing?
I'm good, Ger. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm wondering, if you're Andy Farrell, how do you treat this? The world is obviously a very changed place, and normally you'd be like, oh, it's a game against Italy, I can make some changes, I can experiment a bit, but all of a sudden every single point they win in the Six Nations equates to money, and the IRFU, like every sports organisation in the world, really needs money. So it's not really a time to be experimenting.
No, it's not. And I think he's done his experimenting in terms of the overall squad that he's picked, and seems to have, put Devon Toner and probably Sean Cronin and that out of contention. So he's brought in, obviously Ryan Baird is in there as a new starter, and he's gone with with Kelleher and Herring, sort of Dan Heffernan as hookers. I know Cronin wasn't really there before, but he still got picked over for the quarter final. So do you experiment? No, you don't. But do you play the people that are playing on form, regardless of their age, regardless of their packs? And is that called experimentation, or is that just called picking the right team that's playing on form? And I think looking at the depth of the squad and the strength of it, it really is. Obviously, you've got a few injuries there, but outside of that, he's pretty much picking from those that he wanted. Obviously, Furlong and Levy and Earls being, injury people that would probably have definitely been definitely isn't a great thing, in the squad. So no, I don't think he experiments, but I think he'll go with who he feels are the best people, and they may well be newer, younger people in some cases.
Now that so one of the other things that we thought might feed into selection ahead of all this was the way that the World Cup draw was going to be formulated, and up until a couple of weeks ago we thought that the results over the Six Nations and November were going to have an impact on what tier you're in. Now the tiers are decided, so in that sense there is actually, certainly in the November international window that's coming, the Nations Cup or whatever it's called, there will be plenty of room for experimentation there. This is explicitly about trying to win something, and as outrageous a chance as it might seem, we still technically have a chance of winning this competition. So you've just got to go for it now with what you think is going to win the matches.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think within that there's a bit of scope for, mixing and matching in terms of positions without calling it experimentation, because there's no real bolters there that you couldn't see coming. So, and that don't deserve necessarily their place. So he will probably mix and match and look at the blend depending on who you're playing. But you would do that anyway. You would do that whether it's a provincial game or an international series. And I think it is down to winning, that and at the same time bringing through younger players. But it is about the winning, and it certainly is. They have to start off strong against Italy and put that one away, put that one to bed. It would have been pre-COVID, that match, the middle match of the Six Nations, that you might have thought historically people would have experimented. But I think he has to start strong. I can still see someone like Ryan Baird featuring in that match, maybe not as a starter, maybe as a starter, and justifiably. So you start strong against Italy and you continue against France. We never know what France is going to sort of turn up at what France might do. But, it'll be one game at a time. The bigger picture piece, the next World Cup, I think that's for after this window, really. I think that this window is about running, your patterns, where are we as Ireland? What sort of style are we going to play? Are we going to evolve more than we didn't get to see enough of it post World Cup because of the Six Nations being cut short. So is he going to change style, develop away from sort of set piece and, called plays and set routines to much more of an offloading, play what's in front of you type game? I don't know. We might have an idea by the end of this block in terms of Six Nations and the Nations Cup as to what his philosophy is, what his coaching philosophy is in terms of the style of play, because we didn't get to see enough of that in springtime. That's
the other side of this, I think. We understand that sport, and we've been talking a little about the football team this week with regards to Stephen Kenny and this one-off match having so much riding on it, and it's literally the third game of his international management career. So a very inexperienced international manager dealing with the crisis of COVID. From the perspective of Andy Farrell, we really don't know what he is trying to do in the medium term or in the long term. And in a weird way, these two games followed by the bulk of the next international series that he's going to have, actually gives him a real opportunity to get his stamp on this. It's almost the same length of time as a World Cup would be. Well,
that's it, and that's certainly what I'd like to see. Not that he cares what I'd like to see or any of the rest of us, but I'd like to know after this period of games is what style are we playing? What is our general ethos in terms of playing? Because we certainly saw Joe Schmidt's stamp on all of the previous games, and it was very, very successful right the way through until the end of 2018. So what is Andy Farrell's, what is his stamp? What way does he want to go? And is he going to change? And the break, in effect, I think will almost have helped him, because the Six Nations, it was still very much the post-Joe show, and there was a lot of scrutiny. There will be scrutiny, obviously, because we all love our sport so much and we'll all look at it. But this is a real opportunity for him to evolve the team over this period of time. And whether people come in and out or changes are made, like you'll always have injuries anyway. You'll have people who are not playing to form if selected as well. So that there is that window, and he's picked a big enough squad to look at that. But again, I wouldn't call any of the people that are picked, experiments. I would say that they're all there. You look at Hugo Keenan and Shane Daly, they're on merit as well. And I'd say one or other of them will be certainly in the mix, if not starting against Italy.
Yeah, well, certainly you'd expect that there's a very good chance either of them will be in the matchday squad. And the way things are going, like obviously Stockdale's performances for Ireland have been excellent up to a point, and if you're the head coach, I guess you want to try and get him back to that level and give him confidence as opposed to taking him out of the team. It's a very difficult balancing act to get right, isn't it?
It is, and I think players perform differently with different squads and around them, and quite often people go back to the club for that, I suppose, renaissance, and for that piece of, I've got my teammates around me again, and they grow and they revitalise. But it could be the opposite for Stockdale, that he would come into Ireland and show that form that he has nearly always shown for Ireland. I can't say that he's always shown it, but he certainly was very strong again in 2018. And he'll be aware as well, that I suppose James Lowe is literally waiting in the wings, that he's a potential after this tranche of games as well. But I suppose each player will focus on their own piece and what they have to do to get themselves into the right frame of mind. And who and where do you play Stockdale? Do you play him? Like obviously Ulster have been experimenting with him at full back, or do you play Larmour at full back, which is probably my choice. If I was picking, I think Larmour needs that space, and I think he's a natural fit for there. But again, Leinster even are changing between himself and Keenan, wing full back to see as well. So it's great to have that flexibility in a back three situation. And I mean, obviously Andrew Conway has been nominated for Player of the Year, in that he's been, he has been good, and he sort of scores a phenomenal amount of tries regardless of which shirt that he's wearing. So that back three piece is is a really interesting pick, and I don't think any of them that are picked will let us down, but it's very competitive.
I do wonder if there's a possibility that we're going to see an innovation in that, and maybe it's not an innovation, but all three of your back three players can actually play in any of the positions, and so at any one moment in the game the opposition doesn't quite know who is actually the full back, and they look up and they go, okay, you are minding the house, and then from an attacking perspective it's like, well, is Conway playing full back, or is he actually, have they switched? I don't know if the pre-programming that's required to beat these defences who are so well programmed actually allows for that freedom, or if that would be a massive kink in the matrix, and all of a sudden the system breaks down because you're changing things around too much.
No, I don't think so. And I suppose if you play the sort of heads up rugby and looking at what's in front of you, and that you can pre-plan a certain amount, like you're saying, but also that naturally happens in a rugby game, in that the wings and fullback cover each other. But I think you're right. There is opportunity to use the individual strengths of the players at different times. I mean, Conway for his height is like probably one of the best counter movement jumpers in the game. Like, he is absolutely phenomenal, and it could be that you move him around depending on where the kick chase is, or the box kick, or whatever. And likewise, like Larmour and his feet and everything else, and the way that he can attack the space and create the space for others as well, because he draws the defenders to him. That, look, it's just, I certainly think it's an option. And that's like Stockdale, I suppose maybe he doesn't have as many skills in his armoury, but he is absolutely devastating as a finisher with ball in hand, so it's really an exciting piece. It's a good situation.
It would, and look, I think if Stockdale was in the same form now that he was in 18 months ago, we would say, oh, what an embarrassment of riches that we have there. Getting the players back to, I mean, maybe it's a World Cup hangover, maybe whatever it is, maybe the whole squad feels that as well, which is why some of the new young players, and you mentioned Baird a little bit earlier on, well, he is the classic new person on the scene that everybody salivates over because he's physically impressive. He's stood up against Saracens when all around him, there weren't many people come out with their reputations enhanced. And we as sports fans are always, it's the next thing along that excites us almost more than, the great player at the end of his career still doing great things.
Yeah, and he's really exciting. And I think that that potential partnership with James Ryan is possibly one for the ages, that if it continues to grow and develop, but I suppose it's who will be running the line out is the piece, that was Devon Toner's one of his many skills. I'm not talking about his height, but I'm talking about his ability to run a line out, which is completely different than having the tall person who runs up or jumps, the highest. Like even, if you look at the Munster situation, Billy Holland is still the best person to run a line out for Munster, and that his understanding and his knowledge and everything like that. So there's more to being the second row forward than being, the strong young buck who's running around the place and doing all the impressive stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out. Will James Ryan take on that leadership piece? And, with Ian Henderson, back in the mix as well, he's there. And to be fair, those are the three that I see vying for the starting two positions at the outset.
I think definitely everybody would agree with that, right? The position of Tyburn, he's down as a lock. We've seen them play six before in the past, right? I often, recently since the World Cup and since South Africa have, and since Saracens have started to beat Ireland routinely through what they do against Leinster and then what they do when those players play for England, have wondered about the merits of actually maybe trying to turn Henderson into a six at this stage, or experimenting a little bit to see if there are certain times in games when the opposition we know is going to try and brutalise us. Why don't we fight fire with fire? And if somebody like Tyburn is capable of playing in the second row and also being brilliant at six, I know he's a completely different player. Is it madness for us to be thinking like that and actually trying to do that as opposed to outthink the opposition?
Are you thinking of Henderson as, as a six at the side of the scrum, defensively, or, one from the back of the tail of the line out, or are you thinking of
brute force
putting him there?
And brute force as well. So you have Baird or whoever, and James Ryan, and then all of a sudden it's like, and I'm not saying we do this for 80 minutes in every game, but maybe against England we do it and we're happy because we've tried it against some of the other teams and we've seen it work.
Yeah, look, I've thought about this a bit in terms of obviously Leinster being outdone by Saracens and following the same model that England have used on us in the last few matches that we've played, and up until and including 2018, we didn't let that affect us and we didn't let that happen. And I suppose you can control yourself as a team how you play. You can decide that, okay, well, we're going to move them around. We're not going to engage in mauls. We're not going to engage in direct confrontational battle. But you can't choose what they do when they have the ball, even though you can try to influence it. And I think it's a mindset piece here as well. And we have to be ready for it. And our players are good enough. I don't think we have to pick, all of the beasts of men to do this piece and to go toe to toe, because even when we had our first choice in terms of, those that you would play, sometimes just found wanting. And I think that's what needs to be looked at more, is how have you prepared for this what psychological input is put into it as well, because now it's a bit of a thing, isn't it, that England have, they've outmauled us, they've outmuscled us, they've outfought us, and what have we done to change it? I don't think changing the personnel will change what we do against England or what the provinces will do against Saracens. I think it needs to be much more holistic than that. I mean, I look at the like of Will Connors as well and his chop tackle technique. If you multiplied him, and had 8 of him in the pack, I don't mean him personally, but, those that were absolutely excellent at that chop tackle, at cutting down at source, then, if you apply that technique and that everybody is doing that, you might find that you're faring better against the power teams that want to outmuscle us. So I think it's not as simple as picking, an Ian Henderson at 6 or, packing the pack. It's much more, I suppose, detailed than that, and that's what Andy Farrell is getting the big bucks for, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true, and all the pressure and the kickback when that happens as well.
Yeah,
the squad is exciting if he picks the players who are new and who we haven't seen, but there's also a possibility that it's a very seasoned, grizzled team that takes the field for the Italy game, which, instead of it being a traditional, I'll change my team from one game to the next, it's actually the team that gets picked for Italy is more than likely going to be the team for France, given that there's a 2-game window and you've got to win them both.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a problem with that. I think you've seen a natural transition in players and in the players that are in the squad over the last, since the World Cup. I think you look at Sexton and you can't argue against him. You can't argue against him as captain or as the form 10. And he's probably the most experienced, if you want to say. And my little son now would be able to tell me the ages of everybody. But I know that, he's up there. But he's absolutely the best person for the job. And would you say, well, let's try Carty or Ross Byrne? But they haven't put their hands up yet to do that. So I wouldn't be experimenting there. And I don't think there's anything wrong with not experimenting. Do I think Sexton will be there at the next World Cup? Do you know what? He could be, but I'm really hoping that we have alternatives. But the alternatives have to come and take it off him, and make sure that, they are without doubt their choice. And I think the interesting thing that might play out over the next 6 months is Madigan, in that he for me is possibly, in the absence of Joey Carberry, is possibly the pretender still to the throne. So maybe other people, think that or think that's a bit mad. But he has to obviously get into Ulster first and do all that piece. So if your argument is, we should be experimenting, I wouldn't be experimenting with Sexton. And I've called for Schmidt loads of times to experiment with him in terms of giving other people a chance. I don't think now is the time for that. Do you put somebody else inside him? Okay, so as a Munster person, that could be shot for saying that that you shouldn't have Conor Murray there. Is it a chance to try Gibson Park or Marmion for the Italian game? Obviously Murray's just coming back out of injury again. A lot of the talk, since the other day is Cooney missing out, but you have to be able to, nail your starting position in your province, really. And, obviously Matheson has done a fantastic job up in Ulster since he left us down there. So is there a bit of play there that you could put a different 9 in, potentially? Do I think he will? Not. I think he'll go with Murray, Sexton, and that will cause debate because obviously Murray has been injured and also hasn't been playing for a while really quite as good as he could do. And outside of that, you look at the centres and you look at who's there. Would you experiment? I don't think you need to experiment. He's picked experienced people. Yeah, it's a real battle as well. So you don't need to experiment. You've got youth there, you've got experience there, you've got a great skill set there. So yes, you might, one day, if my 3 centres probably would be, Bundyaki, Henshaw and Ringrose, and you might experiment with regard to who's 12 or 13 or whatever. But it's not. There's no real room. I think that the place for, and it's not an experiment, but who's going to take the back row? Who's going to be your starting back row, and who's going to be your backup back row, or does he have two 5.5s or second row back rows on the bench, which is a possibility that you could see as well, which would give you your extra muscle. But so. I don't think it's going to be stayed because there is new people there. You look at the front row. So obviously Furlong is injured. So Porter has to, you know, continue his form, and I would suggest he'll get picked, and that John Ryan will be probably his backup. I don't see anything stale about it. Cian Healy, I think he'd start. And that's not been stale. That he has been a form player, you know, for all of last year. So I don't think he needs to experiment in grand brushstrokes. I think he needs to just pick the team that he wants to go out and win, and there may be tweaks in that each year or each match.